On today's World Insight with Tian Wei, blockchain embodies the Internet of Value. How will it revolutionize our lives and our pockets? And we look at the qualities blockchain must possess to spark mass adoption. And here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you on CGTN. Blockchain, one of the buzzwords in technology, is set to rise in China. Recently, Chinese President Xi Jinping underscored the fledgling technology as the country increasingly views blockchain as key to future innovation. Has the digital game changer arrived? How will a boom in blockchain impact our lives? Today, we delve into the world of new technology and talk to movers and shakers of the fast-growing industry. But before the discussion, let's walk through the latest in blockchain technology.
Blockchain may have started out as a novel concept in the virtual world, but more than a decade later, it has swelled into something much greater. Blockchain features an immutable record of data that can be used and shared within a decentralized network. First, blockchain can help build a paperless tracking network. Second, blockchain enables much faster financial transactions. That's why the technology may also replace or at least make up for the current trading platforms or transaction services. And finally, the transparency with blockchain could possibly rule out fraud, theft, and corruption when it comes to voting or transfers. During a study session of the Communist Party of China Central Committee Political Bureau in October, China's top leadership underscored the importance of blockchain technology in the new round of technological innovation and industrial transformation, advocating accelerating the development in the sector. Global market research company IDC estimates that China's investment in blockchain will top $2 billion in 2023. For this year, most of the investment went to the banking sector, while manufacturing, retail, and professional services have gained popularity. China's top leadership last month emphasized blockchain development. Analysts believe that official recognition and corporate power will push the applications of blockchain and spur even more spending in the sector.
In Toronto, we have Don Tapscott, who is the co-founder and executive chairman of the Blockchain Research Institute. In fact, that is the largest think tank on blockchain in the world. Good to see you, Don.
Good to see you.
Well, you are being termed as so-called the father of blockchain. I don't know whether you really like that title or not, but I'm sure you can explain blockchain much better than I do. One sentence or two, what would you say?
Well, for 40 years we've had the Internet of Information. But when I send you some information, an email or a PDF, I'm sending you a copy. That works great for information, but it doesn't work well for assets like money or securities or intellectual property or art or music or the data in our identities. Copying those is a terrible idea. If I send you 1,000 RMB, it's really important that I don't still have the money. So the way that we manage this problem in our economy is through large intermediaries, banks, stock exchanges, credit card companies, social media companies, and they enable us to trust each other. What blockchain does is it enables us to do transactions and to manage assets peer-to-peer. And trust is not achieved necessarily by an institution, it's achieved by cryptography and by collaboration and by some clever code.
Okay.
So we're moving from an Internet of information to an Internet of value.
How do you look at the potential now, particularly when you have more and more countries joining in? I mean, at least the nation states. For example, Chinese President Xi Jinping recently saying that blockchain technology is going to be core technologies. China needs to catch up with it and also at the forefront. There are other economies, those of the Middle East, the UAE, Japan, Canada, even Turkey, Iran, Israel, you name it. So Switzerland, many in Europe as well. So where is this? Is it mainly now nation states leading the role? Don?
Well, there's a critical role for a nation state, and many blockchain supporters welcome President Xi's remarks about the importance of this technology, that he got it right in this case, that many people think that the big technologies going forward are things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the Internet of Things, and robots and drones and autonomous vehicles. All of these technologies will need a transactional foundation. They'll need a way of doing commerce, of engaging people, of storing secure data. And blockchain is going to be the platform to do that. So I'm not saying it's more important, but it's very foundational. And consider this, that the Internet of Information was based in Silicon Valley. This Internet of value will not be based in Silicon Valley, I don't believe. It will be based somewhere else, or there will be a series of global centers. And one of the most important variables determining who's going to be the winner and who's going to lead this whole thing will be the role of government.
Well,
we need governments to understand the importance of this technology. We need governments to embrace this technology to make their currency a digital currency. We need governments to be model users and to use the technology internally. We need governments to create the policies and the economic incentives to develop entrepreneurship and ensure this technology will succeed. So every country in the world is trying to come to grips with this, and it's very uneven.
Don, but on the other hand, the decentralization is being believed to be one of the major characteristics of a blockchain. And yet you look at the governance style in the world today, the government still play a central role as to how the rules are designed, how the society is approaching the next stage of development. So what do you make of that? You know, the nature of blockchain vis-a-vis the governance style of the world even today?
Well, there are two ways of looking at this. One is, how do we govern the evolution of blockchain? And my view is that just because it's decentralized doesn't mean it needs to be disorganized. And there's a role for standards, there's a role for cooperation amongst the various players, and there's a role for stewardship of this second era of the internet. Now, more broadly, this technology does pose a big question about the nature of our governments and the nature of institutions. And it's not technology that designs institutions, it's people. But this technology gives us an opportunity to empower people. And when you do that, I think good things happen. Like, consider something about all of the data in our identity. All the transactional data, our healthcare records, our educational data, our locational data, and so on. We sweep up all this data into a mirror image of ourselves. And this data represents our identity. So rather than these identities being stored on a central computer somewhere where they can be hacked, and where we can't use the data to plan our lives, and where we can't monetize the data, why not create a sovereign citizen identity where that data is owned largely by the citizen?
What you just said, Don, sounds beautiful, and I would rather like to believe that will be the case, but it sounds very much like the very beginning when the internet was being born, in a way, that people talk about the universal access. But as a matter of fact, it is not. There is the internet divide. There is the ever further digital divide as a result of this. And there is national boundaries, even so-called universal platform of the internet. So what you have just described sounds like a big picture and a beautiful picture, but usually the realities develop in very different directions as the original plan, Don.
The question is, do these problems mean that blockchain is a bad idea and we should give up on it? Or are these what you would call implementation challenges? Like the digital divide is a big problem, and it's not just access to information. Think about the fact that today we have 1.5 billion people in the global economy who don't have an identity and who are not involved in the global financial system. Many of them have a supercomputer in their pocket, and we could give them access to financial services through blockchain. And this, again, is one of the reasons that a country, and China seems to be doing this, should move towards a digital national currency. And if there was a digital RMB or a crypto RMB, that's sort of like Bitcoin, only it's the state fiat currency, then these could be rolled up across countries all around the world to create what Mark Carney, the head of the Bank of England, calls a global hegemonous stable cryptocurrency that could replace the US dollar as the currency of record. And that would be a very powerful thing in terms of generating wealth, generating prosperity around the world, and helping us achieve social stability as well.
Several points in your statement earlier. One is that, of course, China is creating it. We all know it's been experimenting it. It's called the central bank digital currency, and it's been there to operate on 2 layers, as the research head of the central bank earlier claimed. It is not just at the central bank level, but also tap into the resources of commercial banks to make the idea work. But it is still backed by a sovereign state. In other words, it's very similar to for example, the original idea of US dollar as the the currency of the world, some say. So how do you see this kind of sovereign state initiated digital currency or cryptocurrency likely to be in the future?
Well, sovereign states should have their own currency. This is an important asset of a state. And you need a central bank like the People's Bank of China to be able to manage the money supply, to make changes to inflation, to be able to move money into the economy if there's an economic crisis and so on. But by making that a cryptocurrency, a digital currency, this will give central banks very powerful tools. For example, you could have a lighter touch on regulation because transparency would help you find bad actors in the economy. You could use a central currency when you change the inflation rate. You could have a better handle on what's happening in the economy. What are people doing? They're spending more, they're saving more, they're investing more. In a crisis, you could helicopter drop money right onto the mobile devices of the population to help stimulate the economy. Now, there are some downsides with this too, but overall this would be a powerful thing. And then that currency, the Chinese fiat or government currency, gets rolled up into a global currency that could help us build a more sustainable and prosperous world.
Don, of course, this has to do with the topic of shift of power. As we know, the US dollar has been the widely accepted currency for decades since the Second World War. But now the US has been having increasing debts over the years, and that has put in a lot of question mark about the potential of US dollars and also how the way it's been operating fair to or not to the rest of the world. So do you think there will be cryptocurrencies coming from other economies taking the place of US dollar? How big is that potential? And also whether sovereign states would like to accept the cryptocurrencies invented by the other governments to be the one that to replace the US dollar, or everybody wants to have their own and therefore there's none.
Well, this is the argument for what Mark Carney, the head of the Bank of England, has said, that these fiat currencies from each country can be rolled up together to create a global cryptocurrency. Now, I'm not an expert in monetary matters like this, but this is not coming from some kind of revolutionary or some kind of seditious person trying to undermine the nation states. It's coming from one of the most respected government leaders in the world, the leader of the Bank of England. So would it affect the U.S. dollar, and would the U.S. Federal Reserve be insecure about that? Perhaps. But remember, currency is one of the hundreds and hundreds of opportunities of blockchain. This is not just about currencies. It's about a new platform for changing every industry and the way that corporations operate as well.
There's one question more. For example, Libra, of course, that's a very different nature, has been trying to persuade its way through the Capitol Hill, which has not been very successful. On the other hand, you've also seen companies such as some of those credit card companies from the United States earlier joining to support Libra, now trying to withdraw from its potential cooperation. How do you see these interactions? What kind of lessons does that provide for, let's just say, digital currencies, such as those cryptocurrencies that could be possible in the future?
Well, it's a great question. And in theory, Libra is a very important initiative. Imagine bringing 2.5 billion people all around the world onto a platform where they could send money to each other and make payments.
Yeah.
So that means that a Chinese doctor in Toronto could send money to his mother in Beijing, and it didn't have to go through Western Union. It didn't take 7 days.
Yeah.
It didn't take, it wasn't charged 10 to 20%. It took 7 minutes, and the person was charged 1%. So this is the global diaspora, people who've left their ancestral lands and send money back home. And the remittances market, that's what it's called, is $1 trillion a year. Well, that's one of many examples of how something like Libra can have a big impact. Now, having said that, if Libra can be implemented, it would be very powerful, but that's a big if, because it has many impediments to being successful, not the least of which many governments are threatened by a system like this that comes not from a nation state, but from a corporation and from a series of companies cooperating together. So there are huge difficulties for Libra in making this happen around the world.
But on the other hand, isn't that the fundamental argument that you've been using, that is all players now could be important on the so-called development of the blockchain, but now you see it is not, because the roles of the government still is dominating in deciding the fate of the potential? Don, briefly. And Libra is just one of those examples. I'm not saying it is the best. I'm just saying use it as an example.
Yeah. Well, my view is that government should not be threatened by these other currencies. There's a role for them, even on a much smaller level. Consider something like Bitcoin. You know, there are places in the world where there are severe restrictions over capital flows, or where the inflation rate is thousands of %. So something as simple as Bitcoin could be a store of value for people in those countries, and it could be a way of moving money, a unit of transfer as well. But again, the key point here is that the currency is one type of many, many digital assets, or assets that can be digitized. You can have assets like securities, stocks, bonds, swaps. There was a token offering. These securities are represented by a token.
But on the other hand, we have seen the turbulences being created as a result of this current debate and the current back and forth tug of war between the policymakers and, let's just say, the industry. For example, Bitcoin, you've seen its roller coaster almost a way of pricing over the past few years. Recently, it's also a big example of that. So how do you see the danger now, at least during the debate process of still the blockchain, and cryptocurrency is only one of those applications of blockchain, certainly?
Yeah. Well, this is why I was excited about President Xi's announcement, because it's causing the world to wake up. Libra did the same thing. And for politicians to start to pay attention to this, because the fundamental problem is they lack knowledge. Those legislators in the US lack knowledge about what this technology is and its importance. You know, you think about something like in the developing world, 70% of all land titles are not enforceable. So you're in Honduras, a dictator comes to power, he says, well, you have a piece of paper that says you own your farm, but the central government computer says my friend owns your farm. Well, and this kind of problem exists in many, many countries around the world.
Okay.
You put land titles onto a blockchain and they're secure, they're transparent, and nobody can mess with them.
Of course, the blockchain for good, that is a lot of the topics being discussed for now. But before we go, there's also another issue, that is when China jumps into the blockchain development with a market as big as 1.4 billion, with quite strong science and technological developing capabilities, and certainly a population ready to test new things at all times. So Don, to you, what could that mean, and what kinds of timeline does that provide to you in terms of potential of blockchain on some of the most important applications, if you can?
Well, to your earlier point that this is taking a long time to evolve, that initiative is accelerating activity all around the world. You see, with the Internet of Information, we were messing with information, which is important. Now we're starting to talk about rethinking the way that we manage value and assets in our economy. The fundamental things like money and securities and intellectual property and so on that makes the economy work. So this is changing the nature of the corporation, the architecture of the firm, as companies will look more like networks. It's transforming and is beginning to change entire industries. You can have safe avocados in the United States because the provenance of an avocado is known, because it's on a blockchain. In India, Reliance Industries is implementing blockchain as a service for its mobile customers, 300 million users. And that kind of thing is underway. So it's very uneven. You have these spectacular things happening, huge, powerful announcements from governments like in China. But on the other hand, you have a lot of resistance to change.
A mixed picture,
as you said. When they see a new paradigm.
Yes.
Yeah,
Don Tapscott, the co-founder and executive chairman of the Blockchain Research Institute. We're really running out of time of the satellite. Sorry so much. And thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Don.